Okay, and welcome back to to Community Conversations. The faux pas there is that Full Reform is another show that I tape out of the Sun Prairie Media Center here. We're having some technical difficulties with reaching our first guest, so I'm going to punt here and go in a slightly different direction in the hopes that we can still bring our guest Mai-Zong Vu on the air. If not, we will have her back on a show sometime soon, hopefully as soon as next week. Just to give you a brief update on what's going on with Kasjiab House. Again, this is a project of Journey Mental Health Center, and this popped up in the news about a month ago that the administrators at Journey Mental Health had failed to write a grant that was necessary to give transportation, something involving a couple $100,000 out of the $1 million budget. And their decision, rather than to try to find alternative funding sources or to work with the community, as per what the Hmong community leaders like Mai-Zong Vu and her husband Peng He have conveyed, their decision was to shut the program down. That would have been disastrous for many of the Hmong community leaders who are elders, who are people that grew up in Southeast Asia and endured the traumas associated with the Vietnam War. This is an innovative program that's nationally known for its compassionate approach to meeting the needs, the mental health needs of folks in that community in a very culturally appropriate way. And so there was a danger that that was going to go by the wayside. Now, in brief conversations I've had over the weekend, there's some indications that while the relationship with Journey Mental Health will end, the funding sources, which include aid and other federal sources, will be maintained in the context of a new nonprofit. But details, I think, with all of that are being worked out. With any luck, we'll be able to talk to Mai-Zong about that and get the lowdown. But what I want to do in the interim, while we're seeing if we can still connect with her, is go a different direction. This summer, I had the opportunity to be in conversation with Bishop Yvette Flunder. She is a United Church of Christ bishop based out of Oakland, California, and she was speaking up in Michigan near my aunt and uncle's cabin. And she just had some amazing observations about the times we're living through, about our need to address issues of equal opportunity, in ways that keep people out of boxes, that make us all part of the struggle. So, with any luck, we will be able to share that conversation with you in a moment via a YouTube video that I put up, and I'll try to place it in broader context later after it's complete. And then 7:30, once again, we will be bringing our next guest in, John Becker, on the phone to talk about Madison flood relief prevention efforts moving forward. 8 o'clock hour, Marigan McQuarrie on the importance of electing women in office. This is Community Conversations here on the Sun 103.5 FM. We're going to actually move on to what our original plan was and be in conversation this morning with Mai-Zong Vu. And she, again, is a Hmong community leader who is championing the cause of Kasjiab House, which is an important facility that treats elders in the Hmong community. And Mai-Zong, I think I can hear you now. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay, we've got you. Thanks for your patience. Can you stay with us maybe just a few minutes past 7:30, or is it going to rush you in terms of getting to work today?
No, not at all. I'm gonna work from. Yeah, I could stay past that.
Okay, we'll see if we can give you pretty close to a full half hour then. Well, so I was explaining to our listeners earlier a little bit of the background of what's been going on. A little bit of, Kasjiab House's history and its purpose. And, of course, it relates to this wider picture of the fact that a lot of the folks who are elders in the Hmong community, in your community, we owe them a debt of gratitude, because these were folks who were on the ground in Vietnam who were assisting people, the people who were serving in Vietnam, again, folks who were without necessarily a country, but who very much want to support us. And then after the war ended, many Hmong people came here. And anyway, I appreciate you, of course, know this whole story, but for folks who don't know, a disproportionate number of the Hmong people who did come to this country settled in California, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. So, so that's the backdrop for all of this. But so why don't we just start with, though, the basic mission of Kasjiab House, how it evolved, and if I'm missing any pieces of the puzzle, if you could fill those in for us, please.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for having me to talk about this, as this is a very important program for the Hmong elders in Dane County. Kasjiab House is a holistic approach, culturally competent places where it's kind of like your version of Yahara House. It's a daytime program for the elders where every day the elders are picked up by a Hmong driver, bring them to Kasjiab House. At Kasjiab House, they convene together as a group to get group therapy, group education, general English classes, people coming in to teach them about nutrition, all the one stop in addition to having Dr. Coleman there who comes in to manage the medication and give them treatment as well as bilingual individual therapy and a women's group on Monday evening. So this program is a program that is what we call a home away from home for the elders. And that started way back when I was in the state refugee office in Department of Children and Family, where it all started with the concept of during that time was warfare reform time, and we have quite a few number of Hmong who were taking care of their spouse at home because the spouse had some kind of disability, could not go to work, so they ended up taking care of the spouse all day. But during that time, the spouse who's the caretaker is also subjected to doing work hours because of W-2. And so the whole initial thoughts was to get them away from their spouse so they can get a break from,
respite.
A respite. And so that was the initial concept. And then as we got the county to participate with us on that, and then the elder learned about it, and they start coming pretty soon within, 6 months or so. The elders just, grew, and the community helped, and Dua and Dr. Coleman and Dr. Roger, they were seeing so many elders because of the trauma and so forth. Something that we all don't talk about a lot is that the United States policy on refugee is when they get here, the first thing they need to do is go to work. And so a lot of the refugee program during the time that I was in the refugee office is employment. The minute you get a refugee here, you help them in job subsidy and subsidize an employer. Employer would, work with that refugee for and hoping that they would retain them. So coming from a war-torn experience where refugees, many refugees like the Hmong who came to Wisconsin had a lot of PTSD, which, we never addressed that. So
you really have to think outside the box in a situation like this, because the very that folks were seeking shelter or asylum, or however you want to define it, seeking a new home in this country, is related to the trauma that they suffered in Vietnam. But of course, while there are worthwhile reasons why immigrants come to this country from all over the world, of a variety, in this case, it was very specific. It was rooted in their commitment to serving our country. And so you would think we could think outside of a box here.
Right. But again, our policy in the United States doesn't think about long-term investment, thinking about, how do we not get people, support in the long term, but, short term.
Well, and just briefly, put it in perspective. If the reason behind this is that folks have to work when they get here, so they're giving back to the economy, not taking advantage of government services. That's not their, so it doesn't become their motivation for moving here. But the intergenerational aspect in the Hmong experience means that's not going to happen, because the elders are going to come, but they're going to come in the company of family members of at least one or two successive generations who will make those contributions. So nobody is asking for a free ride here.
Exactly. And in the Hmong community, we've been seeing that where, now, the 1.5 generation like myself and the younger generation, now they are, out there working and making that contribution right now. So I think that's something that we haven't really take time to accumulate and look at, how much we have contributed to our new country. But that's not the issue here.
So I apologize. I just want to direct a couple of things to make sure that our audience is understanding several aspects of this. And so we've touched on this, but we should maybe just explain to folks who aren't familiar with the nature of post-traumatic stress disorder. It is, of course, something that many Vietnam veterans and veterans of previous conflicts have come back with. But it's not a simple thing. It's not like depression or something. It's just a simple matter of feeling inhibited or feeling traumatized. It actually changes the brain chemistry. It has a broader effect in terms of putting someone into a really difficult place, kind of the primitive brain where it's hard to respond to things, and you need to be brought out of that, brought into a sense of peace and calm and support. And that sounds like that's the whole purpose behind what you're doing at Kasjiab House.
Right. Mm-hmm. And, for people who don't go through this, it's hard to experience. So, hard to understand. So, like, an example of some of the things that's happening for the elders, like, we have this Country Independence Day, we celebrate with firework, right?
Yeah.
And you would think that our elder would love to go and see that, but no, they don't, because the fire triggers war for them.
Yeah.
So on July 4th, many of them don't want to listen to the firework because they don't want to, go through that again. And so there's things that we do here that triggers their own PTSD, and sometimes we don't understand that.
This hit home to me this summer when I was at my uncle's cabin for the 4th of July, and their longtime neighbors are a couple where he is a veteran of the Vietnam War. And the young people around the lake don't understand why firing off firecrackers at random places, in this close community where you can hear everything that goes on around the lake, why that's hurting probably a dozen or more of the Vietnam vets that are there. So there's a lot of public education that has to be had here. People of different generations understanding how things like fireworks impact, but just in general, I think understanding that actually PTSD is a fairly common experience in some ways. We're all vulnerable to past traumas. We all have things that set us off or trigger past difficult events. But in this case, it's off the scale. We really have to be sensitive about this.
Right. And so Kasjiab House is just a place to really help, the elders manage, those feelings where they be in a safe place, a place where they can get peer support from their peer in the same language, and be protective. And so a lot of times, when we look at places like Kasjiab House in isolation, we don't think is that important. It's just another program, but it is not just another program. It is the only program in the nation that's truly culturally competent in serving the Hmong elders. And over time, when Kasjiab was such a successful model that, folks in California and Minnesota, replicate Kasjiab House. And, for example, like the Welder Foundation, they took on the concept of Kasjiab House and enhanced it. And today they have a blooming, center that's serving refugees.
Yeah.
Here we are dropping the only thing that we have that we know is working.
So let me just try to frame this in some questions. So with now a limited time, we can try to get through some of this. And when we'll have you all back, we want to actually cover this in some way. I think on every program moving forward, giving people updates, and maybe at some point. I know you had a very meaningful press conference where Hmong elders, through translators, were able to explain all of this. So maybe there's some way we can do that down the road. I explained to our listeners before you came on the air a little bit of the history. Again, the Journey Mental Health, which used to be the Dane County Mental Health Center, had taken this program under its wing. So when that happens in the context of a bureaucracy, I think Peng He, your husband, was explaining to me, it's the catch-22 because you have that larger support structure, but conversely you have a lot of constraints you're operating under. I don't think that they were able to do their own fundraising in quite the way they might have otherwise. And even though we're talking about throughout the show how important it is to get people to understand, I think in this community that program was so successful that certainly among the mental health professionals in town, other folks who are concerned about the Hmong community, it had an amazing foundation. It has a base of support, and so now the key thing is to move it out of the Dane County. Or rather, the Journey Mental Health structure into its own structure, where it can harness that support, bring it all together, and that's essentially the direction that you're trying to move to. Is that right?
Yes, that is. So we have met with public officials and really make the case that we need to move on, even though Journey is a place where a lot of people still can go. For our elders, the trust has been broken, so they're traumatized now for another thing.
Re-traumatized, yeah.
Right. And so there's a lot of mistrust, so we want to just move on and go on to a new place and a new entity. So, yes, that's the direction. We, on Friday, September 28th, it's the day when they are supposed to be closed, but that we are going to launch the new site and the new entity that we're going. So I would, I invite people who wanted to come and join with us to celebrate that new launch. Come to Kasjiab House on Friday, September 28th from noon to 1:30, and help us celebrate. And that's when everybody will get to kind of, talk about the good old day and moving on to, a new direction.
So I'm sorry, I wasn't maybe listening closely enough. But where is that again?
That's going to be held at Kasjiab House right now.
At Kasjiab House. And where is Kasjiab House?
Kasjiab House is right off on Woodland on the ground of Mendota Mental Health Institute.
So on the north side, kind of off of Northport Drive? It's one way to get there? Okay.
Mm-hmm. So once people go there, just go to Woodland Drive, and it's right across the Woodland Drive where, one side you see all...
So if you're, just to give people a definite sense of this, so if you're that intersection where Northport and, what is it? It's not Packers. So anyway, you're coming from Northport and Packers, coming around the curve there, past Walgreens, past Warner Park on the left, and then maybe another half mile ahead is that turn to Woodland Drive, I think. Right
past the North Tri Garden.
Okay. Well, that'll help, and I do hope folks will come out and support you on that day. And I definitely plan on being there. I got to go to work at 3 on the west side, but I can. It sounds like the timing's going to work exactly. So again, we just want to encourage people to be part of this. I guess the one thing I would add is that the additional aspect of this is that this is occurring, I think, in a bigger picture. I talked to Peng about this, and you guys necessarily are need to focus in on, of course, Kasjiab House, but it's also part of a picture, I think, of Journey Mental Health making a transition from being a community-based service to something that is more a clinical model. And there were 30 years of efforts to move it in a community direction, which is the direction a service like this should be. You mentioned Yahara House, which is also a nationally recognized program, a peer support place for LGBT people. And so all of this is really, really important. Broader context for all of this is that it's part of a bigger picture. And I'm going to just be very transparent here. I think I have our next guest who's called me on my cell. I will call you back in just a minute, John. And we're going to be finishing up with Mai-Zong here just a second. And so the last thing I wanted to ask you, if you don't mind, all of this is playing out at a time when there's an awareness in our community of the second number, if you could, Jeff. Of just the place that immigrants play in our life, and ICE, the immigration agency, is in town now and conducting random raids. They're confronting people on the streets who of majority culture, asking for identification. There's at least one allegation of someone who is married to a citizen of this country and who was well on the path to citizenship. Well, ICE claimed that they had missed an appointment, so that's why they were being arrested, but there's no evidence. In fact, there's a lot of evidence to the contrary. So this injustice is playing out. And I know your experience is that you see the interconnection of these issues, whether it be with other immigrant populations or the larger struggle for social justice. What's your response, and what's the response of your community as this all plays out?
Well, why this is affecting, more of our community is it's also affecting us. So in this round, it also includes one of our Hmong men who's, had some issue with the law before, but it was all cleared out by the fact that he just has a green card and not a citizen. They also round him up yesterday. So it's not just affecting other communities, but refugees who, like us, came here and have not gotten the citizenship and had, simple violations also are affected. So we're very thankful for folks on the ground who's doing a lot of these work, including here in town, Freedom Inc. It's trying to respond to this in, the positive way that they can in terms of educating the community as well as working with, the city police saying, we don't, want them here. They should go, get ICE out of town, pretty much. And that's the message that they're trying to do. And I don't do that every day, so I don't know what their strategies are, but it is affecting people, and it is, it's feeling a lot of fear for people.
No, that makes a great deal of sense, and that's an issue we'll be revisiting too. I hadn't realized it was affecting folks in the Hmong community. But it's just, and it's just outrageous that a federal agency comes into town. They haven't coordinated with local authorities or local law enforcement. In general, local law enforcement, I think, has taken an honorable position here in saying that they aren't agents of ICE. That's not their job. They will destroy, as we were talking about earlier, relationships of trust if they allow this kind of thing to go on. And so there's a bigger picture here, and it's just trampling all over people's rights. It just doesn't make any sense, does it?
Yeah, no, it's hurting more than helping.
So no question about that. But there's so much going on here. We're now endeavoring to get our other guest on the phone, and he's still available. Is he, Jeff? Okay, so he's going to be calling in just a second. Can I hold you on the line for just another minute or so? Mai-Zong?
Yes.
Okay. So can you maybe just personalize this story, just one example of someone who has used the services at Kasjiab House, what that's meant for them?
Sure. There's so many stories for the elders, and so I'll give you the testimony one that they shared. There was this one woman, who's now here in town who has lost her husband, and she's all by herself now. And she told a story of the two hardest things in her life was when they were in charge of protecting an American soldier during the war, And during that time, they were so fearful that the American pilot would die if they don't protect them. So she sewed clothes for him. They fed him and took care of him and hide him from the communists. And they did everything they could to make sure that he stays alive, and while other people tried to come and rescue him, meaning, secretly take him away. And that was the hardest one, but after they were able to save him and people, the CIA soldier were able to come and, airlifted him, they felt, great. And then she went on to talk about the second time that was the hardest for her in her life is when, she got here to the United States and she has no language skills and so forth. And nobody's, understanding her mental illness, and she cried and so forth until she came to Kasjiab House, and she was delusional more or less, where she doesn't understand what's happening, and so Dr. Coleman treated her and gave her some medication and helped her manage her mental illness. And so she talked highly about how this has been the two most struggle times in her life.
Wow. Yeah.
She's very appreciative for Kasjiab House because now she's able to comprehend on a daily basis without having to worry about being, delusional all the time and fearing what she would do.
That's a very powerful story. I'm sorry to cut it short, but we've got to move on to another guest. But thank you so much for spending time with us today. Do keep us in the loop. I'm going to keep in touch with you and Peng and see how I can help personally. I know a lot of other folks have that motivation. So again, coming up on Friday the 28th from 12 to 1:30 at Kasjiab House, which is on Woodland Drive off of Northport, have a chance to celebrate this new era, this new part of Kasjiab House's existence. So, Mai-Zong, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, John. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And again, this is Community Conversations here on the Sun, 103.5 FM.